Real Estate Practice, 8th edition quizzes. Instructions. Quizzes are open book. All answers are true, false, or multiple choice. Answer key is on page 587. Quizzes 577. Let's jump into it. Quiz 1. Chapters 1 through 6, pages 1 through 52. 1. When testing the conduct of an agent while engaged in real estate-related activities, the independent contractor, IC, provision in the broker-agent employment agreement cannot and does not change the sales agent's classification as an agent of the broker. B. 2. An outside salesperson is defined as a person who regularly works more than half of their time away from their place of employment. 3. An agent needs to collect income data during an interview with a prospective broker, including both A and B, including the number of sales the agent is likely to close during the first year, and the share of the gross broker fees the agent will receive under the fee-sharing schedule offered by the broker. So in recap, an agent needs to collect income data during an interview with a prospective broker, including the number of sales the agent is likely to close during the first year, and the share of the gross broker fees the agent will receive under the fee-sharing schedule offered by the broker. 4. The best time for a sales agent to renegotiate their share of broker fees is at the height of a booming market. 5. To keep claims from clients and others under control, a broker needs to maintain a risk reduction program. 6. Agents are required to be members of the trade association that owns a multiple listing service, MLS, to post listings and access the MLS database. That's false. Agents are not required to be members of the trade association that owns a multiple listing service, MLS, to post listings and access the MLS database. That's how you say it right. 7. Neither a sub-agency nor a dual agency relationship is created between a seller and a buyer's agent when the seller pays the buyer's agent's fee. 8. When a dual agency is established on a 1 to 4 unit residential sales transaction, the dual agent may pass on any pricing information from the buyer to the seller without the buyer's prior consent. Sounds false. It is false. When a dual agency is established on a 1 to 4 unit residential sales transaction, the dual agent may not pass on any pricing information from the buyer to the seller without the buyer's prior consent. 9. A broker must disclose to their seller the existence of an indirect interest one of the broker's agents holds in the property. This is true. So a broker must disclose to their seller the existence of an indirect interest one of the broker's agents holds in the property. 10. A compensation disclosure form is used to inform sellers, buyers, of the broker's ownership interest in an affiliated business. This is false. A compensation disclosure form is not used to inform sellers or buyers of the broker's ownership interest in an affiliated business. That's how it would be said accurately. Quiz 2. The content of the agency law disclosure form is not dictated by statute. That's false. The content of the agency law disclosure form is dictated by statute. That's the truth. An agency law disclosure form needs to be presented to all parties by an agent when listing, selling, buying, or leasing for a term greater than 1 year. Commercial property and manufactured homes. So, an agency law disclosure form needs to be presented to all parties by an agent when listing, selling, buying, or leasing for a term greater than 1 year on commercial property and manufactured homes. 3. An open listing does not need to contain an expiration date. This is true. A seller's broker needs to disclose to the seller the broker fee they will receive on a net listing before the seller accepts a buyer's offer. For a seller's broker needs to disclose to the seller the broker fee they will receive on a net listing before the seller accepts a buyer's offer. 5. An exclusive right to sell listing agreement entitles a broker to collect a fee when they locate a ready, willing, and able buyer and submit the buyer's full listing offer to the seller. True. A client's oral promise to pay a broker fee entitles the broker to enforce collection of the fee. False. So, let's see. That means an exclusive, nope. A client's oral promise to pay a broker fee does not entitle the broker to enforce collection of the fee. That's how you'd say the true way. 7. The diligent effort of a broker under an exclusive listing includes both A and B, analyzing property and marketing the property. So, the diligent effort of a broker under an exclusive listing includes analyzing the property and marketing the property. Yep, that's right. 8. A right to buy listing supersedes a replacement property provision in an exclusive right to sell listing. True. A broker will be paid a full listing fee on the further leasing of the listed property without the broker's consent when a withdrawal form sale clause is included in the listing agreement. Let's take number 9 again. A broker will be paid a full listing fee on the further leasing of the listed property without the broker's consent when a withdrawal from sale clause is included in the listing agreement. 10. A broker can require a seller to relist with them if the seller decides to sell within the cancellation period. False. The truth is, A broker cannot require a seller to relist with them if the seller decides to sell within the cancellation period. Quiz 3. Chapters 12 to 18, pages 101 to 161. 1. The safety clause period commences on any of the above: the expiration of a listing agreement by its own terms, a seller's termination of the agency before the listing period expires, and on a seller's withdrawal of the property from the market before the listing period expires. So the safety clause period commences on the expiration of a listing agreement by its own terms, a seller's termination of the agency before the listing period expires, and a seller's withdrawal of the property from the market before the listing period expires. 2. A properly worded and perfected safety clause is enforceable even when a seller relists with another broker. 3. The price agreed to in a purchase agreement is based on the property conditions as is disclosed. True. 4. A broker needs to keep all advance cost accounting records for at least 3 years. 5. Placing a for sale sign is neither on 5. Placing a for sale sign neither on private property with the owner's permission nor on public property with the city's permission is a misdemeanor public nuisance. In essence, it's okay to use for sale signs when you have private property owner permission and public property city permission. So, permission grants, no misdemeanor. No permission, could be a misdemeanor. So be careful with that. 6. Special agency duties owed to a buyer by a broker arise when the broker enters into an exclusive right to buy listing agreement with the buyer. True. 7. The exclusive right to buy listing agreement is the agent's offer to render services for a fixed period of time. This is true. B. 8. A cooperating agent is used as the title for the subagent of the seller. C. 9. Broker fee provisions in a purchase agreement are to be placed above the buyer's signature and within the four corners of the contract. So a broker fee provisions in a purchase agreement are to be placed above the buyer's signature and within the four corners of the contract. That means it's in 5 places. Brokers become third-party beneficiaries when both seller and buyer enter into an agreement with a provision calling for the payment of broker fees. True. Quiz 4. When a buyer has orally agreed to pay a broker fee and the seller knowingly interferes by inducing the buyer to breach their promise to pay, the seller owes the broker the promised fee. True. So when a buyer has orally agreed to pay a broker fee and the seller knowingly interferes by inducing the buyer to breach their promise to pay, the seller owes the broker the promised fee. Cool. 2. The best protection of a broker has against the alteration of broker fee instructions is to dictate that escrow prepare unilateral fee instructions. False. 3. Records of an agent's activities on behalf of a buyer during the listing period need to be retained by the agent's broker. 4. A seller's agent does not have a duty to investigate the accuracy of any information provided by the seller before passing it on to the prospective buyer. That's true. 5. A seller's agent's visual inspection of a 1 to 4 unit residential property needs to include defects known to the seller's agent and readily observable by the seller's agent. 6. A seller's agent's opinion given to a buyer becomes a statement of fact due to their fiduciary relationship with the buyer. False. An inexperienced seller can rely on an agent's opinion as positive statement of truth when the agent holds themselves out to be especially qualified in the subject matter. True. 8. The use of an as-is clause in a purchase agreement to make the buyer waive delivery of a transfer disclosure statement, TDS, is void as it is against public policy. True. 9. A buyer has 2 years from the close of escrow to recover losses caused by negligent failure of the seller's agent to disclose a 1 to 4 unit residential property's observable and known material defects. 10. A seller's agent is exempt from conducting a visual inspection of a 1 to 4 unit residential property when the seller is exempt from using the Transfer Disclosure Agreement, TDS. That's false. So, a seller's agent is not exempt from conducting a visual inspection of a 1 to 4 unit residential property when the seller, well, we'll just say that the thing is false, because there's 2 pieces that could be negative. What's false is a seller's agent is exempt from conducting a visual inspection of a 1 to 4 unit residential property when the seller is exempt from using the transfer disclosure statement. I wonder what the truth is. Check out chapters 12 to 18, pages 101 through 161 to find out. Quiz 5, chapters 24 to 27, pages 221 to 258. Number 1. An automatic reverse safety device is required for all automatic garage doors installed after January 1st, 1991. If you want to win on that one, just remember, you won. Alright. 2. A separate form is required to be filled out if the water heater is marked as being in compliance on a TDS form. False. A separate form is not required to be filled out if the water heater is marked as being in compliance on a TDS form. Double check that. The use of a home inspection report, HIR, does not relieve a seller's agent of their duty to visually inspect the property. That's true. You gotta check things out. 4. If a buyer discovers an error in an HIR which affects the property's value or desirability, they have 4 years after the date of the inspection to file a legal action to recover money losses. 5. A home inspector may not pay a referral fee to a licensee for the referral of any home inspection business. True. When a seller has refused to authorize the preparation of an HIR prior to entering into a purchase agreement, the buyer is advised to order one on opening escrow. 7. A buyer is able to enforce a reduction of the purchase price before closing for defects undisclosed to the buyer if the purchase agreement contains a price adjustment provision. True. 8. A natural hazard disclosure, NHD, needs to disclose whether the listed property is located within 2 miles of a proposed airport when the NHD is prepared by an NHD expert. A flood zone designated with the letters both A and V is subject to mandatory flood insurance requirements. 10. An NHD requires a seller and the seller's agent to disclose to a buyer whether they have any knowledge that the property is in an earthquake fault zone. True. Quiz 6. Section 1 items on a structural pest control report, SPC, are conditions which will likely lead to infestation. False. 2. Areas that do not need to be inspected during an SPC inspection include both attics with inadequate crawl space and floors covered by carpet. 3. A seller is required to investigate or have a survey conducted to determine the existence of asbestos on the property. False. 4. A seller has a duty to investigate whether their property contains toxic mold. False. 5. Lead-based paint was banned by the Federal Consumer Product Safety Commission in 1978. They finally caved. 1978, lead-based paint was banned by the Federal Consumer Product Safety Commission. 6. Annual increases in the dollar amount levied as regular assessments by a homeowners association, HOA, are limited to a 20% increase over the prior year's assessments. 7. An HOA is obligated to provide the documents requested by a seller within 10 days of the seller's written request. Eight. On 1 to 4 residential dwellings, a seller's agent has an affirmative duty to disclose their knowledge of possible tax consequences. False. So a seller's agent does not have an affirmative duty to disclose their knowledge of possible tax consequences on 1 to 4 unit residential dwellings. 9. To avoid misleading a client, a broker or agent is advised to, all of the above, disclose the full extent of their tax knowledge regarding the transaction, advise the client to seek the advice of a tax professional, and disclose how the broker or agent acquired their tax knowledge. 10. As a matter of basic competency, brokers and agents will possess an understanding of fundamental tax concepts regarding the 1031 profit reporting exemption. On to Quiz 7, Chapter 33 to 38, pages 309 to 369. 1. A seller's agent has an affirmative duty to voluntarily disclose to a buyer information regarding a death on the property which occurred more than 3 years prior to the purchase offer. False. A seller's agent does not have an affirmative duty to voluntarily disclose to a buyer information regarding a death on the property which occurred more than 3 years prior to the purchase offer. 2. On direct inquiry by a buyer or their agent, a seller's agent must disclose their knowledge of any deaths on the property. True. Okay. 3. Deposits into an impound account are considered operating expenses. False. After receiving an annual property operating data sheet, APOD, from the seller's agent, the buyer is advised to review tenant files, confirm utility payments, and get quotes on hazard insurance, premiums, and taxes. 5D. The use of a land sales contract, lease option, and an unexecuted purchase agreement with interim occupancy requires a written carryback disclosure form on 1 to 4 unit residential property when the seller will partially finance the sale. 6. A carryback seller is concerned with their loan-to-value, LTV ratio, of the purchase price. 7. Adjustments and prorates for unpaid and prepaid items are noted on a seller's net sheet. True. 8. During a buyer's market of declining prices and increasing inventory, a sales agent's main objective is to create buyers. True. 9. To form a contract, an agreement needs to be accompanied by an offer and acceptance, consideration, and capable parties and a lawful purpose. 10. An offer to purchase needs to be on a standardized form to be enforceable. False. Everybody might have a different type of form, but if it works, it works. Well, you got all the right stuff on there. Quiz 8, chapters 39 to 42, pages 371 to 414. 1. An option to buy agreement is a bilateral contract. False. An option to buy agreement is not a bilateral contract. That's the truth. 2. C. A seller who is not represented by a broker forms a binding contract with a buyer when, both A and B, they are handed a copy of the buyer's signed counteroffer and they receive an electronic copy of the buyer's signed counteroffer. So, a seller who is not represented by a broker forms a binding contract with a buyer when they are handed a copy of the buyer's signed counteroffer and they receive an electronic copy of the buyer's signed counteroffer. 3. All of the above: death of the offeree, revocation by the offerer before an acceptance is submitted, or destruction of the property before acceptance, all of these terminate an offer to purchase. 4. A seller's counter to an unacceptable offer to purchase can be written on a new purchase agreement form, a counter offer form, and the original offer using the change and initial method. 5. The change and initial counteroffer technique is proper even after the original document has been signed. False. 6. Contingency provisions included in purchase agreements are eliminated by approval of the information identified as the subject of the provision and waiver of the right to cancel by the person authorized to cancel. 7. Written contingency provisions include who has the right to cancel the purchase agreement if the event does not occur, a description of the event addressed in the contingency, and the time period in which the event has to occur. 8. The primary user of contingency provisions in purchase agreements is the buyer or buyer's agent. True. The person with the right to cancel due to the failure of a contingency to occur may only exercise their right if they have a reasonable basis for the cancellation. This is true. Another truth is checking the availability of fire insurance is an activity addressed by an event occurrence contingency. Quiz 9, chapters 43 to 47, pages 415 to 468. 1. A retroactive return to a seller's and buyer's former pre-contract position is called a rescission and restoration. 2. A buyer may place a seller in default when a date crucial to the continuation of the transaction is passed, the event called for in the purchase agreement failed to occur by the appointed date, the buyer fully performed all activities required by the appointed date. All of those. 3. On the failure of a contingency to occur, the person with a right to cancel needs to allow the defaulting party a reasonable additional time period to perform under the authorization to extend provision. 4. Before escrow will call for closing funds, the seller needs to have fully performed. 5. Agency disputes commonly arise during the marketing, escrow, and post-closing period. 6. When a sales agent When a sales transaction is rescinded, unknown and unsuspected claims may be waived using a general release agreement. False. Oh. Don't forget to charge your devices. 7. After a breach of a purchase agreement, if the property resold for $850,000 and the original purchase price was $550,000, the buyer's price to value demand for recovery is $300,000. 8. A buyer is entitled to 10% interest on amounts recovered for expenses incurred preparing to take title. True. Both A and B, escrow charges and payoff demands are a transactional expense a seller may recover on a buyer's breach. 10. Recoverable losses are limited to those a seller incurs from the date of a buyer's breach until before A and B. So until before the date of resale close and before the date of the withdrawal of property from the market. Does that make sense? Recoverable losses are limited to those a seller incurs from the date of a buyer's breach until before the date of a resale closes and before the date of the withdrawal of the property from the market. Quiz 10. chapters 48 to 51, pages 469 to 504. True. For a seller to keep the entire deposit on the buyer's breach, the seller needs to provide an accounting showing their losses equaled or exceeded the amount of the deposit. Okay, very interesting. False. This next part. Without a liquidated damages provision, a seller is not entitled to recover their money losses caused by a buyer's breach. False. 3. A liquidated damages provision is voidable if the amount is not reasonably close to actual losses. True. 4. An arbitrator's award is binding. An arbitrator's award is binding and final, regardless of any defect resulting from an error of fact or law, unless the arbitration provision provided for judicial review. True. Arbitration provision. An arbitrator's award is binding and final, regardless of any defect resulting from an error or fact. An arbitrator's award is binding and final, regardless of any defect resulting from an error of fact or law, unless the arbitration provision provided for judicial review. True. 5. Any defect in the arbitrator's award resulting from an error of fact or law, no matter how flagrant, is neither reviewable nor correctable unless either A, the arbitrator exceeded their authorized powers, or B, the arbitrator acted with fraud or corruption. Oh. Alright, no corruption, please. 6. True. Even if an arbitrator bases their decision on an incorrect interpretation of the facts or the law, neither party has recourse to change the erroneous decision. This is true. 7. Addenda which may be attached to a purchase agreement include all of the above: property disclosures, agency relationship disclosures, and financing disclosures. 8. Under EP laws, both A and B, Saturday and most state holidays are business days. Wow. Saturdays and most holidays under EP law are business days. 9. If a buyer's agent fails to deliver an EP disclosure to the seller, the EP agreement is voidable if by the seller in foreclosure. Voidable by the seller in foreclosure. If a buyer's agent fails to deliver an EP disclosure to the seller, the EP agreement is voidable by the seller in foreclosure. Whoa. 10. C. A seller in foreclosure may recover their property within 2 years after the close of escrow if the EP investor took unconscionable advantage of them. Cool. Right, on to final quiz here. This is chilly morning. Quiz 11. Chapters 52 to 56, pages 505 to 560 to learn more about what we're about to go through. 1. To analyze an income property, a buyer's agent may ask the seller's agent for all of the above information regarding maintenance procedures, a rent roll spreadsheet, and an occupancy history. 2. A carryback promissory note and personal property is considered cash boot. Look that one up in the dictionary, right over here. You know what cash boot is? What's cash boot, you might say? Cash boot? Cash boot? Really? It's not a term in the dictionary here. Gonna have to go look that up. What's cash boot? Go find out. In an option agreement, a prospective buyer is referred to as an optionee. Optionee. 4. Without consideration, an option is merely an offer to sell which the seller may withdraw. True. 5. A particular manner for exercising an option needs to be specified in an option agreement. False. 6. A joint tenancy is legally called a severalty ownership. False. Back to the truth. Number 7. Both spouses or domestic partners need to consent to the lease for more than 1 year of community property, no matter how it's vested. 8. When the co-ownership of property is vested as tenants in common, the death of a co-owner automatically extinguishes the deceased co-owner's interest in the property. False. Back to the truth. 9. Licensed real estate brokers who represent sellers in real estate transactions where the broker will act as escrow are exempt from escrow licensing requirements. True. 10. Escrow has a duty to advise a buyer in writing of the Franchise Tax Board, FTB, requirements for withholding 3 1/3% of the price paid the seller. You can remember that because Franchise Tax Board is 3 words, and then FTB is all of those 3 is 1/3, 3 1/3. Cool. So that's our quizzes, and that's it. Now just listen, go read. As you listen, look things up, and hopefully you'll find out how you discover California real estate practice working for you. Make it a great one. Story of our existence. Thanks you for joining us. Ash and Dust Art, the story of our existence. Signing out.